Right, welcome back to Simply TVR. So, in this episode, basically what's happened is we removed the engine and gearbox from the frame, had a quick look round it, and basically had a bit of a clear up in the garage, and it's basically ready now to go away and be shot blasted. So the plan is tomorrow morning it's going to be loaded up into a trailer, taken away to a local finishing company called Mick Riss in Stonehouse, and I'm going to ask them to bead blast it and then give it back to me bare, so I can then have a look and see what we've got left of the chassis. So what we're going to do is very quickly have a look round the chassis in this episode, talk about a couple of the jobs that I had to do from the previous episode that were outstanding, and go from there really. So I'll grab the camera. So in the last episode, one of the things that we had a problem with was this bush here. Well, not a problem, but one of the jobs still outstanding was to remove this bush here. Now, a friend of mine actually brought a tool that we can just see on the floor. So what we had a piece of stud bar, okay, and we had a piece of tube which was designed to pull the bush through into this tube, which fitted on the other side of the bush carrying tube. And the idea was that when we tightened up the nuts on the stud bar, this would get pulled up and pulled and pulled and pulled until eventually it was in that situation. Well, actually that situation there, where the actual then bush would sit into that tube there. That didn't work. The bush was too firmly stuck in the tube and we couldn't actually get the bush out doing that. So what I actually resorted in doing was burning it out with a propane torch. So basically I set fire to it both ends, opened the garage door, let it burn for about 5 minutes, and then that allowed me with a screwdriver to push everything out of there, with the exception of the steel outer which remained in there. I then used a full size hacksaw blade, manually cut lengthways down one side, just along there until I broke through, and then with a screwdriver I tapped that out. Okay, that was one of the problems that we had. So what have we actually done other than that? We took the engine and gearbox out. The engine and gearbox you can see here, and then we used an engine crane. So over there is an engine crane. I've had the levelling bar on there. On the engine I actually fixed a couple of lifting points. This plate here that you can see, and another one on the front, on the near side cylinder head, this one here. Now I'm quite fortunate that I've got a brand new engine that I keep in the house, and this actually had these extra brackets on, so I was actually able just to borrow those off that engine and just fix it onto these 2 points here, and the same on the other side, which meant it was very easy then just to connect that up to the engine crane and pick that up. So got the engine, a few bits on the front, the alternator, the water pump, the tensioner, the bell housing, the gearbox, Borg Warner T5 gearbox, starter motor still attached. This slave cylinder hydraulic tube didn't need to become detached, that was just left on there. Did make a bit of a schoolboy error that probably pick up when you see the fast forward engine removal video. I forgot to drain the gearbox, didn't I, of oil, so as we tipped the assembly up, it started to leak oil there, and then I put a tray under the gearbox and then emptied it out, but unfortunately the tray tipped over and we had a nice spill in the garage floor, which you can see on the floor there, that I then had to go and buy a bag of sand to go and mop up. So yes, schoolboy error. Sometimes we make them. I certainly made one, and that's my folly, I suppose. So on the chassis then, what have we done? So we removed pretty much everything. It's going off to the bead blasters. So what I've done is, I was a bit concerned, I didn't want these tapped holes to be damaged when it's bead blasted, so I put bolts in, or screws in these tapped holes here and here. This is where the front anti-roll bar fits. I put this in here and here, which is where the body bolts onto the car. I've also put screws into here where the steering rack is attached to the chassis, there and there. So around the front, I think that pretty much covers all of the threaded holes that I wanted to protect. Now I don't know whether I needed to do that. I've just decided to do that just in case. So I also put a couple of bolts in here and here. These were the awkward to get to screws from inside the cabin to unfasten the shell from the chassis, so screws went into here and here. This is where the handbrake attaches to the chassis, so I put the screws back in there. Okay, staying on the spine, this is where the seatbelt attachment point is for the clasp, I suppose, the bit that you put the seatbelt into. So that thread's covered. I think that's not a metric thread. I think that's possibly a UNF thread. I can check that later, but it's different from all the other threads. Okay, I can't reach into the body of the TVR to get the other screws out, so what I've done is I've put tape over these two tapped holes. Now I suspect that all of this is going to get chopped out ultimately anyway and replaced, but I just wanted to put tape over there to highlight to the shot blaster, you know, to be a bit careful with the threads in these holes just in case. I'm not particularly bothered about the threads on the underside of these plates because some of them have got them on, some of them haven't. If I was to keep these plates, I was going to grind the nuts off anyway and just have put a standard screw and nut into the hole rather than having a welded on nut. So just on the underside of the car, in the centre here, you can probably just see I've put these screws in here and here. There's 4 of them, and those are the screws which the exhaust bolts onto, that rectangular plate that's part of the exhaust silencer. They fix onto those points there. Okay, so moving round to the back of the car. Okay, did find a couple of tapped holes, one here and one here. Now worryingly, these never had anything in, so these are absolutely perfect for water that's thrown up by the wheels to land on these holes and just collect inside the tubes. Absolutely fantastic design. I'm not sure why they didn't just put a screw or something and some silicone sealant just to block them off if they weren't going to be used, but anyway, I put screws in there. Then you got these 4 fixings here. These were the ones that we reached through the boot. So there's this one, this one, this one and this one. These have all got screws in. Okay, this is where the exhaust silencer hangs on that bracket. So I put the nut back on, but because it's a threaded screw over quite a long length, I put a bit of tape over it just for now. Okay, and this one up here is where the brake line comes to. There's a T that fits onto that section, and I've put tape over to protect that. So I think that's pretty much it. Oh, there's one here as well. This is where the fuel filter screws on there. So I put a screw back into there. I did have a little bit of a situation. Basically, these screws which locate the fuel pump onto the chassis, if you look closely, what they've actually done is they've welded a piece of stud bar, by the looks of it, onto the chassis top and bottom, and one of them actually snapped off when I undid took the fuel pump off the chassis. The other one was still there. So what I'm intending to do is when this comes back from the bead blasters, I'm going to grind all of this off, clean it up so it's back to the tube, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a 60mm fuel pump bracket that you can buy them off eBay to get rid of that rusty thing that was holding the pump on before. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually fabricate a rectangular plate that marries up with that that bracket, and I'm going to get that welded on in place where that sits there. And depending on the size of it and whether it overhangs or doesn't overhang. I'm not sure. There'll either be tapped holes in the plate or there'll be plain holes that I can then just use a nut and washer on the reverse side. So that's something I need to sort out. Okay, so coming around this side here, again we've got the same seatbelt fixing screw there. I've put tape over these ones. This area here is obviously going to get chopped out and replaced, because we've got this cracking great big hole in the tube here. So I suspect that I'm going to lose this tube here. Not sure how much of the outrigger I'm going to lose, whether I'm going to lose the whole outrigger or just part of it, I'm not sure. So, okay, so I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to show you. Probably not really. So we've covered the engine and gearbox. Coming back into here, just trying to think. So this is the rectangular plate that I was talking about that holds the silencer on the underside of the car. These are what I've done is I've brought these brake pipes in here. So this was the T section that fitted underneath at the back. So I'm going to refabricate that out of something that looks a bit nicer, and get some parts. And then what we've got here is we've got all the fuel lines, the copper ones, and the brake lines as well. They're all just down here, so I can use to help me fabricate some new ones when we come to that part of the job. And I think pretty much that is it. The next job really is we've got to split that that end of that drive shaft off, and we need to get all of these suspension bushes out. So that's that really is the next job. Okay, so if you're still watching, thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.